Hello and welcome everybody. I see there's still people joining, so maybe wait another minute and then we get started with the webinar. There's still people joining, so we'll wait a few seconds. Okay, so welcome everybody. I think we'll start, although there's still people entering, but well, we have an introduction. The introduction will take a couple of minutes anyway. My name is Anja Oels from TÜV Rheinland. I'm talking to you from Bremen today. I don't know if you know it. That's in the north of Germany. We are like the little sister of Hamburg, which you might know better, also a harbor city on the coast. Yeah, we have something like almost 200 people from all over the world here now. It's a bit difficult always if I can't see your face, so I hope I meet the expectations. And it's difficult to see what if what I'm talking about is what is really interesting you, or which part is you have more questions about. We cannot unmute that many people because it would be chaos, of course. So what you can do if you have questions, we have almost half the time of the webinar left for open questions. You can write in the F&A sections where you can write your questions, which will be answered at the end. If you have any technical problems, you can write that into the chat, and we have a nice colleague, Mr. Keiner, who will try to resolve all the technical issues. So as I said, my name is Anja Oels. I'm the, we call it scheme manager here for ISO 45001. That is basically the technical manager. So I'm the one who has to define how we meet the technical requirements and the accreditation requirements with our ISO 45001 auditing service. So in fact, I'm audited as well, at least once per year, by our accreditation body. So with the COVID pandemic, we obviously had challenges in all our management systems on how to deal with the situation, but with organizational health and safety, obviously it's a very special situation because we're actually auditing health and safety, and we're talking about a health and safety catastrophe in a way, right? So it meets from both sides in a way. So it's particularly interesting, and we thought it would be interesting for you as well to see how we deal with it and what management systems can offer. And in fact, what ISO can offer, because ISO has created a new guideline to give additional information on well, how you can integrate it basically into your management system as well. So I'm going to introduce that guideline. So what is going to be the content today? We're going to do, as I said, about half an hour of talking and then half an hour of questions, a short introduction, a short review of what this meant for the standard migration. You know, we are migrating from BS OSHAs to ISO 45001, which is relatively new. Well, it's it's over 3 years by now as well. Then I'm just going to give you a short view on how our audit practice has been impacted and how we resolved as certification body the special situation. Then I'm going to look at it quite shortly from the other point of view, what our impression is, what this has meant for our clients. Was it actually helpful to have a health and safety management system in place, or was it just one more thing to deal with, so it was actually too much work altogether? And then I'm going to talk, which is going to be longer, in more detail of the ISO Pass 45005 document. It's too long to explain everything of it. So I'm just going to look at the main points or things that I thought that are interesting, because they're not that obvious and nice to look into those points. So yeah, if you want the full document, of course, you can always get it from ISO and buy it, but you can at least have an idea of what recommendations this document is giving. I'm not a great artist, but I've made a few little pictures myself, so we don't have any copyright issues. And I thought maybe it makes it a bit more visual what we're talking about, and not have only text, which is very, very boring, because we have all spent a year looking at web conferences now. So at least we have something else to look at. Okay, so introduction, organizational health and safety in the pandemic. We have all over a year of a highly impacted work life and private life as well, of course, in most sectors and most parts of the world. Some countries in Asia did much better than most of the rest of us. Maybe we are wiser next time. But we've all had a roller coaster year behind us, I think, with infection waves. And whenever you think things are getting better again, then they get worse again. The understanding of the virus is evolving. We spent the first month washing our hands, and then the next month putting on masks because people were just, well, the knowledge was just increasing of how the virus is actually behaving. So the technical means are changing. In the beginning, there was a lack of them. Then this has become better, but that obviously will depend on the moment and the part of the world you're in as well. The state measures are, I don't know in your country, but in my country, they're changing all the time. So, and it depends on where you are and when you are, and people are really confused, and the companies have to keep up with it and comply with it all the time, changing legislation as well. So yeah, a real roller coaster experience for most of us, I imagine. So for the companies, that has been an extremely challenging situation, because they had to protect the employees, still have to protect the employees, keep up with the legislation and the situation, and at the same time protect the business, which was highly impacted as well. Some companies had more work, many companies had less work. Many companies had to close down, theaters, hotels, etc. And most of the companies probably had about the same amount of business, but with a lot of extra work just to deal with the situation and the special conditions. So what does in this situation OHS management system mean? OHS is organizational health and safety, right? I make it short. On one hand, it's it's the least. I mean, people had enough topics to deal with, so the management system is something you might think, well, we don't really need this right now. On the other hand, especially as the pandemic as such is a health and safety issue, our impression is that the clients really profited from it, the ones that had health and safety in place, because it created a structure to work with, right? So I'm going to go into that later on a little bit as well. So first thing, the standard migration. This pandemic happened in the last third and a bit of the migration from BS OSHA's 18001. In January, there was still a lot of companies that had not migrated to ISO 45001. Original date was March this year. The transition time, migration time was over. So one of the things that was done quite early in April 2020 already is that IRF extended the migration period. So if you look at the timetable below, we have gained an extra 6 months until end of September to do it. I've not put September green because I've put it yellow, because obviously if you do the migration audit end of September, it will be difficult to have the certificate the 1st of October. So it should really be done by August or beginning of September, the latest. But to tell the truth, I checked a few days ago, and really most of our clients have by now migrated. Many left it for the last year, but by now we have over 90% of the certificates that have migrated already to ISO 45001. So the companies managed to do this extra effort as well in the middle of the difficult situation. Then the next question was, as all companies had to decide how are we going to do our work now, we had the same situation. I mean, management system audits mean normally that an auditor travels to the client side, goes and talks to all the people there, then visits the production installations. Sorry. Visits the production installations, and the next day travels to the next company, does the same. So we as a certification body could become real super spreaders if we weren't careful, right? So this is obviously something we wouldn't want, and obviously something clients wouldn't accept, apart from travel restrictions that would actually make it impossible in any case to travel around freely, right? This has obviously been changing depending on where you are and at what moment of time. In Europe, things relaxed a lot last summer, then they got worse again. It just depends. In America, the waves went differently from the time point of view. But yeah, we've all been facing these challenges. So beginning with China and then working through Europe and the rest of the world, we had to decide what to do. IRF quickly started replying as well. If you like, you will all get the presentation, right? So you can then use these links as well. You don't have to write them down. Has been answering frequently asked questions, that's what they call it, right? On how to deal with management system audits in this situation. So first thing they started allowing was postponement, and then it was also opening more and more on remote auditing, like not traveling, but do the audit remotely. So other relevant sources for these practices, apart from the frequently asked questions, is the IIF mandatory document 4, which is on the use of information and communication technology. This had existed before the pandemic already. We had used it to a certain extent, but obviously this has become far more prominent now. Basically what it says, you can actually download it for free as well. You have the links down there. Basically what it says is you can do what you can do. I mean, if you can audit a way that is equivalent to the quality of being on site, then it is fine. And if you can't, you will need to make a mixed system, right? And then what IIF has been using as basis also is this other document. It's about the management of extraordinary events or circumstances that affect certification organizations. So health and safety, however, has a specific situation as well, because normally it is not allowed to do an audit 100% remotely. There is another IIF document. You can also get a copy of it from the internet for free, the IIF number 5, which says that in the case of organization health and safeties, the remote auditing shall be limited to reviewing documents and records and to interviewing staff and workers, like, I don't know, the sales people, etc. But for process control and risk control, those cannot be audited using remote audit techniques. However, IIF also answered this question, saying basically that under pandemic conditions like now, it will be possible to do even those aspects remotely, right? But this also means that it's important to understand that if we are doing 100% remote audits now, also in organizational health and safety. This will no longer be possible beyond the pandemic, because of course we are also learning a lot about remote auditing techniques. We're seeing how well does it work, where are the flaw points, where are the weak points, what are we going to do in future. We'll most certainly increase the number of remote auditing, be able to reduce traveling, but especially in health and safety, we will always need some kind of on-site visit. But maybe we can use mixed systems with reducing traveling, having a local person doing the site visit and someone else being taken into the audit from outside without traveling. That kind of solutions will probably be where we're going. So how have we been dealing with this situation in this particular case? Well, it has been evolving over time. We have always done individual risk assessments for all affected audits. When it all started in China, beginning of 2020, we started, the immediate reaction was to postpone audits and then to define how to split audits and do a web-based part first, talking about, I don't know, the management system documentation, the management review, internal audits, etc. Do those parts remotely by web conference, and then leave a rest percentage for a later stage to do it on site, right? But that was also when we thought that it was all going to be over in 3, 4, 5 months, right? We did in fact manage to do a lot of the missing parts in summer in those countries where the situation had become better over the summer, although it was maybe temporarily. But then at the end of the summer, we saw that the problem was definitely not resolved yet. So we would need to see what to do with those companies that we had still not been able to visit, or with new audits that had been scheduled and would not be able to be done on site. So we were increasingly accepting 100% remote audits. And at the same time, IIF, if you look at the sequence of frequently asked questions, they were more and more going into the possibility of doing 100% remote audits as well, because they were seeing it was taking longer. It was taking longer than the 6 months extension that was normally accepted for everything. So that it was better to get the audits done remotely, even if this is not ideal, rather than postponing, and maybe not doing any kind of audit at the end of the day for too long, right? So from then on, we started planning where travel restrictions were in place, more and more 100% remote audits as well, depending on the local situation. So apart from the but what is, oh, and this is where you have the helmet camera. Yeah, this is just like an example, but you can have a mobile phone as well, just to do the site visit, because the problem was always what to do with the site visit, what to do with production installations, etc., what to do with construction sites, those kind of things, right? So the difference then was that we were moving away from purely web conference based auditing techniques to include also mobile video technology. And yeah, as I said, you can get really spacey high-tech technology for that, with special glasses and helmet cameras, etc. But a mobile phone with a conference can also do. It's not ideal. We have learned as well, and it's getting better. I don't think it can substitute the on-site visit on the long run, especially for health and safety. It's not even allowed, as we've seen, but it's definitely better than nothing, and better than postponing for years and years, right? So so we had to decide how far we can take those audits, and what we have decided, and it matches with what most other certification bodies are doing. What we do is that we have the general rule that we can do 100% remote, but not if it's a new client, which we don't know at all. And we are talking about a high risk sector, something like petrochemical sector or construction companies. In those cases, we don't normally do a new certification on a 100% remote basis. We will then always try to, in one way or another, have somebody local have a personal look at the installations as well. So what did we teach our auditors, or what did we give our auditors on their way? First of all our audits, also the quality auditors, have to comply themselves with all the hygiene requirements during the audits. We don't want to become a super spreader, of course, and we want to protect our own employees, obviously. So TÜV has rules on that, but all clients normally have rules as well, and they normally match. So it is more preparation work to be done, sometimes testing, etc., but it works, right? But then in the case of the organization health and safety audits, we also have the question of, well, what do we expect from our clients? This is an organization health and safety issue. So we of course have to audit as well the client dealing with the pandemic. And that is very complicated in this highly dynamic situation where every 3 weeks rules are different, right? So one of the main focus obviously is that we do have to check that the clients comply with local legal requirements at that time. So we have, most auditors got a specific training that has been part of our experience exchange trainings and legal trainings, etc. Obviously, as it's changing so quickly, they have to keep up to date with what is the rule tomorrow and what was the rule yesterday. I mean, in Germany at the moment we're discussing testing, which the law is that the companies have to give the workers the opportunity to test themselves, but in some cities like mine, it's actually obligatory. They don't have to offer it to them, but the workers actually have to do them, right? So things like that, you have to know it to see if the client is responding properly. Then we look into how did the risk assessments and the hazard assessments of the clients be updated? How did they check, which are the workplaces with special risk, which are the workers under special that need special support, etc. We check the operative measures up to the standard of course, compliance with local legal requirements, but many companies do more than the law requires, in fact. Yeah. In Germany also, we've had the discussion, home office, is it something you have to offer, or is it something that has to be made obligatory? Is it a right of the workers? Is it just something that can be done but doesn't have to be done? All those kind of things, etc. Shift planning, how do I make sure I don't mix people too much? Mass test, entrance controls, etc. When you talk to the medical service, it will always be a big part of the talks of how the situations is dealt with. All the collateral hazards, what I would say as well. I mean, luckily, not all the time people, the infection rates were so high in all the companies, but you have additional work pressure, you have less direct interaction, you have psychological problems, you have to check what is the physical environment at the home office like, etc. It's not that much about if people actually become ill from COVID, but it's also about what does the whole situation do to them, right? And then we've also given our auditors information on this ISO pass document we're going to talk about in a second. We are not offering it as an auditing service or an accredited service, but we do think it's something that's good to know. So what has been the experience of our clients? I think it will take some time to see what legal or otherwise consequences there may be of poor pandemic management. It will become clearer over time. We have had some scandals here, probably all countries have had some scandals with companies having clusters of infections. And actually, very often it has been in Germany, at least when it's been regarding subcontracting companies that are working on site, because there the controls were even less difficult or not taken seriously enough. Well, we'll see what all this will mean legally once the judges have decided on what responsibilities will actually be taken into place, right? But from our experience, for many of our clients, of course, they were extremely busy dealing with the situation. But the fact to have an OHS management system, I think it was in general very helpful, because first of all, it meant that these clients had an internal structure already in place with people who are specialized and trained and who had already some time of their work time assigned for organization health and safety issues. So they had a structure that could react more easily than companies that didn't have anything like that in place. Also, already a systematic of identifying legal requirements, a systematic of communication channels that were in place, and a change management process in place. So in general, for the companies that have a longer experience with health and safety management system, they had a clear advantage responding to this very, very challenging situation. Now I come to the second part of what we wanted to talk. It's the ISO PAS 45005. It's called a publicly available specification from last December. The full title, you can see it here, is Occupational Health and Safety Management General Guidelines for Safe Working During the COVID-19 Pandemic. ISO is working in general on a 45005 document on safe working in a pandemic, but this is specific for the COVID-19 one, right? So I would like to introduce it to you just because I think it's an interesting thing, an interesting document to see. It gives some additional support from ISO for the situation. It follows roughly, it doesn't follow the high level structure, but it follows, the naming is the same of the chapters. You will recognize it all if you have a 45001 management system, right? But it has additional chapters as well, because of course it's much more concrete than the 45001. It translates, I would say, what the pandemic means to the organization health and safety management system. But you can also use it if you don't have a health and safety management system. It's not that you are that it's needs to be integrated. It can stand alone as well, right? It's complete enough. As all ISO documents, it's always very general because it has to be applicable to all types of companies in all countries. That is always a problem with ISO documents, obviously, but I think it is sufficiently explicit to help not to forget for important parts and give a structure to the actions. And it includes even some things I would not have thought of. When we look at it in detail now in a second, you will see. So we are actually using it as background information for the auditors and the clients. But we're not at this moment offering any accredited service or any specific auditing service. If there is a big market for it, we might set up something, but for the moment we just use it as backup information, right? Some of our competitors, they do it. I think they offer audits with reports, but we find that the situation is maybe too dynamic to do something that it really makes much sense. If you are interested in it, you can let us know and we could set something up maybe. But for the moment, we just think it's good as as background information to have, because now we come to the main weak point. as we said, we have a roller coaster experience here. The knowledge is changing all the time. The technical possibilities are changing all the time. So it is outdated. It can be outdated really quickly. It's from December, and already if you look at it, some points it reads like it's a bit outdated. For example, when it talks about the mask types, it's less concrete than what you would normally find in most countries' legislations by now. By now we would have, I think, more emphasis on ventilation and less than on hand washing than half a year ago, and also now we have started talking about a lot about vaccines and how to I don't know, the question of the future will be if you have workers that are vaccinated and others that aren't, do you have to treat them differently? How do the rules change? Or even the big question, will it be obligatory for some workers to be vaccinated? Maybe if you're working in a care face to the public or in the health sector, whatever. Those things will be an issue maybe relatively soon, and they are not dealt with in detail in this standard because it's from December last year, when we hadn't even started yet vaccinating, right? So I'll just go chapter by chapter, just to give you a brief glance on. It would take far too long if we went into detail, then we wouldn't have time for questions. So it has a first chapter on planning and assessment of risks. And if you know the 45001, you will recognize a lot of the language and a lot of the ideas, like what are the external factors, have an idea of the context I'm working in, what is the local prevalence, what are the legal requirements, workers' access to childcare as well, which is what I talk about. What we said, there's so many collateral issues as well, which are not directly the pandemic, right? Internal factors, my workplaces, specific needs of workers, resources, etc. Organize the leadership and worker participation. You have the question of transparency versus confidentiality as well. This is something you have to resolve, is if you have cases, who will know you are not supposed to give medical information. Of course, at the same time, you have to identify contact people that may have to quarantine. How do you deal with all this? The systematic risk assessment of all work activities. Is work from home possible? Are additional measures needed, etc.? Assessment of all workplaces and further measures. What is the ventilation situation? Limitations of number of persons. Also things like, if you have not used an area of your company for a long time, how do you restart the equipment? Do you need to take extra safety measures? And a long chapter on working from home and mobile working, including also the psychosocial risk, to work from home with supervising math tasks of your 8-year-old is maybe not always relaxing. Then the planning and assessment of risks. Are there workers with a particularly high risk, or are they maybe caring for people with a high risk at home, which would maybe mean they need some extra attention or extra care? Define the critical roles for operational continuity. What are the minimum numbers of people you need? What rotation? Different mitigation actions which go from team definition to revision of work instructions, definition of zones within the company, provision of protective equipment, etc. Revise also your emergency processes. That is actually quite interesting as well. And we have seen that, we have audited companies where the offices are almost abandoned. You only have maybe 10% of the people working there. Are you still able to comply with the requirements of number of trained first aid people, for example, in the offices when there is almost no one there? Do you need to train more of them? What do you do? There is actually a complete annex on specific security issues that are not necessarily COVID, but that may be affected by the pandemic. So there's a complete annex on that, and it is mentioned as well in detail. Then how to deal with suspected or confirmed cases. What is your process? Reconfirm the availability of workers with first aid responsibilities, because also it's not just are they there or are they still willing to do the job. Do they put themselves at risk? Are they maybe themselves a high risk person and should not really attend people that are not sure how ill they are? What is your process going to be there? Isolation and notification of cases, the contact persons, symptoms reporting. Work from home in case of symptom-free infection. Is that possible? Is it not? What is your rule regarding that? What does the legislation say? Testing, contact tracing, quarantine. What we said, the collateral problems, the psychological health and well-being. We have all had a tough year. How can you reduce the impact of that on your workers? Because maybe at the end of the day, they don't fall ill from COVID, but they are burnt out, right? So advices like enable regular confidential meetings, allow flexible work hours and time off. Also assess setting boundaries between work and non-work. That is probably one of the big challenges of the last year, right? With people having working from home and at the same time having extra challenges on the private side as well, looking maybe after going shopping for their parents because they shouldn't go out, and having the children at home, right? Offer resources like counseling, etc. They have a big chapter, actually an annex on inclusivity. I found that quite interesting. Specific needs of disabled, of faith group, language barriers, etc. In the beginning, I thought maybe this is a bit overly politically correct, but it is right, I think. We have seen in Bremen was, my city was the first to analyze really in which parts of the city the pandemic was getting worse and in which it was doing better. And it was seen very clearly that in those places where you had large groups of people that were not really part of the society for whatever reason, for health reasons, for language reasons, for cultural reasons, people that were not watching the local TV program, that were not reading the local newspaper, they were really left behind and left uninformed and left in a particularly bad situation. And the effort has gone now to clearly integrate all people in the solutions. And this has had quite good results, actually, because it is not the right way to wait for people to come and look for information. You have to go to them and make sure they really get it and are included. Resources are a big topic, of course, especially if the companies have financial struggle due to the pandemic. It makes it obviously worse, but also human resources. Many people had to change their task, learn new things like deal with Zoom webinars and things like that, right? Increased workload. Almost all companies have a team that is dealing with the pandemic challenges. A chapter on communication, very important. Communicate properly internally, externally. A chapter on hygiene that includes the obvious hand washing, disinfection, and ventilation. A chapter on personal protective equipment, which, as I said, I think looks slightly outdated to me, but depends maybe as well to the local circumstances, what is available, what isn't. It still talks a lot about the homemade masks, which I don't know, we had a lot of them in Germany last year. Everybody had a nice model with different patterns, and but now they're completely gone, because only medical masks are allowed, which last year were rather should not be used by private people, because we didn't have enough for the hospitals. An operations chapter that makes reference to a lot of the things we had a look at before already, you know, like what does the workplace look like, what how do you organize times, etc. And interestingly, it mentions noise reduction as well, what I found very interesting, because yes, apparently the louder you speak and the more you laugh and the louder you sing, the more the more the higher is the higher amount of virus is you're spreading. So yes, it's true. If you reduce background noise, people won't need to talk that loud, right? And that may reduce the risk as well. Also, things like first return to workplace. If a workplace hasn't been abandoned for 4 months, what do you need to do before reopening? Entering and leaving rules, travel rules, use of common areas, visits, meetings, and working with the public is a big issue as well. Then how do you make the performance evaluations? Do you do monitoring of compliance? They suggest a little management review as well. Of course, the management has to be informed of what is going on at all times. They give a structure to it, and reporting to external interesting parties. And then, as all ISO documents, what about improvement? Take action if measures are not effective, address changes including internal and external issues, and be aware. I think that is the main message. Be aware of the dynamic nature of the situation. Whenever you think it's going down, then it goes up again, and the other way around. And rules are changing quickly. The science is changing. The technical measures you have are changing. So it is a roller coaster experience, definitely. So it's been a bit longer than I thought, but we still have more than a quarter of an hour for questions and answers. If we don't manage to answer them now, you can contact the TÜV.com management systems, and we will do that later. I think also if we have them in writing from the FNA now, you can I can get a copy of that and maybe reply later on if we don't manage now. So yeah, please ask your questions now. There is a little F&A, and that is where you can type the questions actually. And I'll be able. Oh yeah, there were 2 questions about whether will it be possible to receive the presentation. You will get that. It has been answered. And will there be a certificate? Actually, I'm not sure if there will be an attendance certificate. I'll try to find out. If you need one, you will get it. Any other questions? We still have 15 minutes. I see there's a question, how do we get this PT materials? Yes, it will be sent to you after the audit. Then there is a question, I'm not quite sure, Aprasti. Do we need to do HIRA? I'm not sure in English what that is. You will need to explain, or I'll find out and reply it later. Or it can be taken separate. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Yeah, presentation material, you will get it. Hazard identification and risk assessment. Well, yes, you exactly. That was what I was saying, what the auditors were doing. the ISO 45001 requires a hazard identification and risk assessment, and now this has to be redone, considering the specific hazards of the pandemic. Yes, we would expect that. It obviously means to analyze, what workplaces do you have, where do you have specific risk, where can you reduce it, what additional legal requirements do you have to comply with. Also, obviously, if under normal circumstances you would look into, whether which job is suited for which person, would have specific considerations of, I don't know, age, and if someone has a bad back, the person can't be carrying high weight. Well, now you will have different criteria of, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc., which are specific risk factors for the pandemic. So you would need age as well. So you would protect a different type of people. So that would be part of the risk assessment, yes. What is the main advantage of implementing 45005 for an organization that already has 45001? I think it just allows you to check if you have done a complete job. I think it is just, if you have 45001 and you have a pandemic, you will have to deal with it anyhow. You will have to integrate that into your 45001. So the 45005, I think I would just use it as helpful information to make sure I haven't forgotten anything. And it will then depend on your local situation as well, what makes more sense and what makes less sense. Yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily do maybe a complete implementation of it, but maybe just take it and say what is helpful, right? Yeah. Alexia's asking, so we are clear that it is not a certifiable standard, but a supporting document. I think some competitors do certifications, normally not with a certificate document, but rather with a report, for example. I know that DAX will not give will not make it an accreditable standard, so it will be so it would be in any case not be accredited. But of course, you can do a non-accredited work with it on a non-accredited basis. Someone is asking for an example of risk assessment on environmental health and safety. Well, I'll try to keep that and send it afterwards. I don't want to start searching for a good example now on the computer. Any guideline for severity and probability to calculate risk? Yeah, I would have to look those up. I don't want to be looking into documents or give a quick, but it's just common sense, isn't it? Can you provide us a checklist on the things that auditors look into during the audit? What are the documents that we need to prepare? I don't have a checklist right now. It's a little bit what I said. The auditors will check. Basically, the minimum they will check is that the local legislation is dealt with, right? And apart from that, well, we would expect that obviously the risk assessment has been updated, and then the measures are taken that are necessary, and that the monitoring and communication, that all these points also include now the pandemic requirements. Question, hello, if my company has a 13485 quality management system, is it a requirement to follow this ISO? No, of course, it's not a requirement to follow this ISO. It's in any case, it's not even a requirement to follow this ISO if you're 45001 certified. It's just something we wanted to show as maybe a helpful information. And then there's a question, we need to integrate the ISO 14001 regarding the pandemic, isn't it, madam? Well, 14001 is environmental management system. If you have an environmental management system, you don't necessarily do organizational health and safety. That would be a different management system, but it is true that there are always points where they coincide and where you have common requirements. But the most common requirements are normally things like hazardous substances, etc., which are a risk both to health as to environment, right? Question. So it means we are able to use 45005 now. You can always use it, exactly, and hope it is helpful. But that doesn't mean that you need to certify it. What is definitely the true is that that if you implement it, or if you use it at least as a guide, it will make it easier to show that you comply with the requirements for 45001. So this is the other question from Jeffrey Jalorina there. With so many guidelines on COVID-19 out there, what's unique about ISO Pass 45005? That's a good question. There are definitely a lot. There are also specific management systems. And there, I mean, in Germany, one of the reasons why the accreditation body doesn't take it up as an accredited standard is because they say that actually the German legislation is already so detailed that it messes up in a way, yeah? if you have so many different systems. So I think the main advantage of the 45005 is that if you have a 45001 management system, the 45005 speaks the same language, and it's easier if you want to say, okay, I have the 45001, I have a pandemic, what do I have to do to make sure 45001 complies? If you look into that, I think you can just follow it easily and integrate it into the 45001 system, right? Question, is this also applicable to those with ISO 1725 accreditation? Well, the management systems we are talking are ISO 1721 accreditation. So if you want to integrate it in those, that's all below under 1721. But you can always, of course, use it, but as you're not going to certify it, it doesn't really matter that much whether it's ISO, whether your management system is ISO 1725 or ISO 1721. Completely different question here. Can you certify only a production location by ISO 45001, or must the complete company be certified? We'd have to look into the details to make sure that the location can operate individually and set up a complete management system, but it is normally possible not to certify the whole company with all locations, but only specific locations or production sites. That should be possible. We always have to make sure we're not kind of creating a wrong impression for the people that look at the certificate, but that is often more the case if you do it the other way around. If you have a chemical company and you certify the sales department and not the production side that is next to it, that would obviously be something we would not want to do, because it looks like you have certified a high-risk activity and you haven't. You have actually only looked at an office, right? We'd have to look into the detail, but normally it should be possible. Yeah. I'm just looking into the questions. Oh, we've answered that one. There's another question about examples of key indicators concerning evaluation. I'm not quite sure you mean indicators in general or indicators for 45,001. It would you would be required, of course, to you know, the measurement and control part, like how do you control it's in place? Maybe, I don't know, the percentage of people like you would have just, yeah, indicators like I'd have to think. It's basically the measures you have been taken, like what indicators are suitable, maybe on testing, on amount of infection cases, of amount of masks given out, amount of training, etc. Right? Things like that. It will depend on the measures you have, what would be the suitable indicator. Would you advise a government agency tasked to provide assistance to electric? So the electric distribution, maybe I should read the whole question because I think you can't read it. Would you advise a government agency tasked to provide assistance to electric distribution utilities to undergo a 45001 certification? I'm not sure what is meant with the agency and providing assistance exactly, but of course, 45,001 certification makes sense for electric distribution, yes. Hi, will you provide the session documents? Yes, you will receive them. If various pandemic procedures and controls are integrated in the organizational health and safety management system, what will happen when the pandemic is over? It will end, right? Oh, yes, we all hope so. We all hope this is going to be soon. Yeah, we keep them in the drawer for the next pandemic. This is probably not the last one, but as the next one is probably going to be different, we will have to see how far these are still suitable. Does 45,005 contain guidelines in assessing hazards and risks related to COVID-19? It gives guidelines definitely on what points to look in and what to identify. It doesn't, there is no calculation tool on when it is high, medium, low. That is something you would, it doesn't give concrete calculation advice on that. But I think it is helpful to make sure you don't leave out any important point. If the institution is ISO 9001 certified, would you advise to have another certification for ISO 45005? It's probably. I would advise 45,001, the general one, and use the 45,005 just as background information for the pandemic topics. Okay, it's 11 o'clock now, and I've not been able to answer all the questions, but most of them. If there's anything left, just email over the management systems website with the contact details. So I try to answer after that, especially those of you that had asked for examples. Just feel free to contact, and we'll see if we find something. Indicators, examples, risk assessment examples. We can try to look for an example. I didn't have any prepared right now. Okay. So thank you very much and have a good day. I don't know if many of we have a bank holiday tomorrow. I'm not sure if that is anywhere else in the world. So thank you and goodbye.